We are back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to season 2 of the Three and Out podcast. Brett Schaubs, always alongside Ben Pope and Mike Cicchetti. After a long hiatus in the NFL offseason, it is officially about to be week 1. There's still a few weeks left in the offseason, but a whole lot to talk about. Guys, it has been a hot minute, a real hot one. How have we been? It has been so long. Let's share in a nice moment here. How have we been today?
Oh, I've been good. I mean, the last time we recorded, it seemed like a little bit ago. The summer's kind of flown by for me, but when I think about the last time we recorded, in April, maybe,
Yeah,
it,
something
it's
like that.
it seemed like it's been a while. So it's good to be back. Good to be back weekly. Now on YouTube, which is a great thing. So hopefully you're tuning in there.
Meanwhile, I think someone's about to strike my house with lightning or something or other. But yeah, I'm very glad to be back here with you guys. Brett's intro, as lovely as always. When we start interrupting those, that means we're going to be in the midst of the season. But we're getting things started here up on the end of August here. So yeah, I'm really excited. Look at the tandem there, the Rams hat and the Seinfeld shirt. Brett is raring to go for the start of season 2 here.
Yeah, and we've got a lot in store. As Mike alluded to, we are now on YouTube as our main platform, so be sure to stay tuned in for weekly updates on YouTube as well as your regular podcast or podcast platforms, Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, wherever you get them. And be on the lookout for all sorts of social media updates as well. We'll be updating every week. But without further ado, let's jump into our opening episode here. We did something similar last year. We're going to stick to what worked, and we're going to start with our AFC season preview. Now, obviously, the AFC has shaped a lot differently, guys, through the last 5 or 6 months. Teams have gotten acquisitions, some teams have fallen apart, but in the end, we are weeks away from moving into what will be the first displays of each squad. So we will begin with the AFC East, which might be one of the more interesting divisions in this conference. You have the Bills, Patriots, Dolphins, and Jets. So why don't we kick it off with you two talking about who we have sort of as our dominant force here in the division and who we see winning it all.
So I think it's pretty, you know, undebatable at this point that the Bills are objectively the best team in the AFC East. You can argue maybe Miami with the acquisitions that they've made and Tyreek Hill and Tua getting another year under his belt. I think Tyreek Hill basically highlights that for the Miami Dolphins. But I just think that the Bills are the team to beat in not only the AFC East, but I think they're the team to beat in the AFC. They have the strongest position groups at every position, in my opinion, the most complete team. But yeah, I think it is the Bills at the top as the top dogs in the East.
Yeah, this was kind of a shock to me, kind of looking more in depth on it when I was doing kind of my season predictions here, that I was actually a big fan of the entirety of the AFC East. I know that the I guess big favorites are in the division are the Bills, like Mike mentioned, but I started to really grow on the other three teams in the division, being the Dolphins, the Patriots, and the Jets. The Jets are kind of a team where they are dealing with an injury to their quarterback, Zach Wilson, right now, but they seem like a very interesting team in the second year of the Robert Saleh era. I'm really interested to see how their young pieces develop, whether that's new signees in Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson from this year's draft, Brees Hall in that as well, and some of the guys that they were able to get the previous couple years, including Elijah Moore and Zach Wilson. They've got an up and coming defense, and their O-line is one of the surprisingly top in the top part of the league. So I'm very interested to see how they develop. Another one really interesting to me was Miami, how much that they've really truly added in the offseason. They brought in Teron Armstead, Tyreek Hill, like Mike mentioned. They also brought in Evan Ingram to fortify the defense a little bit and brought in a starting running back, which they really haven't had in a little bit, in Chase
Who
Edmonds. So They brought in Melvin Ingram, right?
Oh, okay.
You said
Yep.
Evan Ingram. I was like, hold on.
Oh,
What?
I said I think I said Melvin, but I also
You
have,
might
like,
have. I
a
heard
thunderstorm behind me,
Evan
so
Ingram. I heard
Oh.
Evan Ingram. That's why I was confused.
no,
But
Melvin.
Yep.
She's first oopsie of the season, huh? Well, I
Didn't
got,
take
like,
long. Never does.
I got buckets of rain behind me. Oh my, this is really bad behind me. I don't know how the rain is where you guys are.
It
No,
is
it's not
bad.
fun.
It is very, very bad.
But the rain is. Yeah.
We'll keep going. But like Mike mentioned, I do have the Bills as the top of the class in the division. I think that it's really hard not to recognize how good the Bills are, especially led up by an MVP favorite in Josh Allen. The Bills are actually, just looking at it on FanDuel Sportsbook right now, they are the current favorite for the Super Bowl. They're plus 600, right above the Buccaneers and the Rams. So, yeah, with the addition of Von Miller in the offseason, that was really their biggest addition that they've made. They weren't really a team that needed too many additions to really fortify themselves, not only at the top of the division, but as one of the AFC's strongest teams. But yeah, I have the Bills kind of as the head of the class in the AFC East.
Yeah, 3 times the charm. I also have the Bills as the top dog in the AFC East. Like Ben mentioned, I didn't think they needed much to begin with, but adding Von Miller, I guess you can call him now. Yeah, she's yeah, really just fortified the pass rush with
Starting up early, I see.
Oh yeah, we're gonna be mentioning Von Miller. But I'd say
Again.
the secondary will be fine, even though they lost Levi Wallace. Who
That doesn't stop. That doesn't.
You say that you say that now, but you look at how many games he actually played as the number 1 outside corner last season, and you always forget how impactful he was. He was actually a solid player. So
No, I agree.
I'm gonna.
I agree with you 100%. But he was the number 2 when Tre'Davious White was at full health. Granted, Tre'Davious White was hurt for half, maybe more than half the year. But I agree with you that it was impactful, but I don't think it's that much of a loss.
No,
when you get Trey White back as the number 1, you draft a Khair Alam first round. Taron Johnson, you know what he does in the slot. I think they'll be fine without Levi Wallace. I don't think that is much of a talking point in general.
I was gonna say they're fine, but yeah, they're regardless. I think they'll be the top dogs. I think the Dolphins are gonna end up finishing second. Like we mentioned, the amount of presence they added to the offense and what they brought to the table is a lot stronger than last year. I think they've actually wanted to give Tua that support system for a while, and they finally were able to do so. And I'm a big fan of the offensive play package that they're offering with Mike McDaniel this year as the play caller. You had Brian Flores as a little bit more of a defensive-minded head coach, so now you give Tua that extra support as your head coach. I see that working really well. At the end of the day, I have the Patriots in third and Jets in fourth, just because of the big risk factor with Zach Wilson and whether or not he's going to be able to either A, stay healthy, or B, remain consistent as the quarterback for the Jets. But this is a division where, like a lot of these, it's up in the air what's going to happen. There's a lot of young talent that is dependable on how these records are going to play. But I think the one thing is for sure that the Bills will finish number 1.
Agreed. And like you mentioned about the Jets, not even how much can we rely on Zach Wilson this season, which is obviously maybe the biggest question surrounding their season. It's just they have so many young pieces where I think even if, like, I have them in last at 7-10, that's a successful season for the Jets. They're super young, and this is basically their first year of – they're still in a rebuild phase, technically. I think a 7-10 season would be very successful because it sets them up for the future as long as Zach Wilson shows flashes, which he did in his rookie year, and I think he will continue to do even more so in his second-year campaign.
Do we want to go through our specific standings for each right now?
Yeah, let's go for it.
In terms of records?
Yeah, so I can kind of start off. I have the Bills at the top of the division. I have them at 13-4. I have the Dolphins in second place. I have them at 11-6. I really looked at through their schedule, one big factor that Brett kind of mentioned it with Mike McDaniel coming in, but something that really stood out to me is kind of the impact of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Between those two and the impact that Tua can have if his arm properly is developed with Mike McDaniel, who can truly like match those two in a shootout type fashion? There's a lot of offenses in the NFL that cannot match that. Very few can. So that really boosted them up for me, especially with their defense still being a relatively strong part of their system. I have the Patriots in third place at 9-8. I think they were pretty stagnant. I don't think that it's impossible to see them over 500, even though that I do have the division as a relatively strong one in its entirety. And then same with Mike, I have the Jets at 7-10. I believe that, I have them at 6-11. So one spot down, but I still have them as having a relatively successful season. And I'm really interested to see how their young pieces on both sides of the ball are able to develop.
Yeah, if I look at mine, very similar. Bills win the division, 12-5 record. The Dolphins come in second at 10-7 on the season. Again, all depends. It could be higher, it could be lower. Patriots finish in third at 9-8. I think the run game is going to be a lot stronger this year. Surprisingly, with Ty Montgomery as well, I think he's going to be a big impact. And then fourth place will be the Jets at 7-10. So I think all three of us have the Jets at 7-10.
For me, I have the Bills like Ben 13-4 at the top, Miami 10-7, the Patriots behind them at 8-9, and the Jets 7-10, like I mentioned before. We all of our standings match up, and we're only a game or two away from each other, team-wide, record-wise. So, yeah, I mean, I'm surprised we all agreed on something for once, right?
Well, I don't want to speak too soon here, Mike. I think when we go into the next division, we'll have some turmoil here. So why don't we go into that with the AFC North, Brett?
100%.
Yeah, let's jump into the AFC North, and there is a lot to unfold here, to say the least, in this division. You have the Ravens that are now coming in another year stronger. Everybody is returning from injury. That includes guys like Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey, Lamar Jackson, J.K. Dobbins. All of them will be back fully healthy, presumed, to start the season. You have the Bengals, who are coming off a Super Bowl appearance, losing to the Rams in last year's contest. You have the Steelers, who lost Ben Roethlisberger but gained Mitchell Trubisky and first-round pick Kenny Pickett. And then you have the Browns, who acquired Deshaun Watson in a absurd trade, but now lose him for 11 games in a suspension. So there's a lot of things to look at. Let's start with the Ravens first and what we expect from Baltimore. There's a few things. All right, so clearly Mike doesn't want to start with Baltimore. How about we start with the one that's been?
I was shaking my head in amazement because I'm excited for Baltimore. Well, let's start with Baltimore.
All right, let's do Baltimore to start out. Ravens, we just mentioned, got a lot of people back. Could be division winners, could be in the middle of the pack. It all depends on how John Harbaugh can handle everything together. What are we expecting out of the Ravens this season?
Bounce back season.
Elaborate.
In depth there, Mike.
So the Baltimore Ravens get Lamar Jackson back. He was insane, really, through when he played in the first half of the season and went down. They were just such an injury-riddled team. And I believe they were in last place too, weren't they? Last season?
I don't know if they were. I don't know if they were at one point.
I think Cleveland was at the end of the day.
Because they were near the top of the division, and then Cincinnati passed them. I don't think they were in last at any point.
But I'm expecting a big season. Regardless. And also, on top of that,
they finished tied for last.
Okay.
Sorry.
On top of getting all these these guys back healthy, another thing is I think they had the best draft class. Amazing picks from Tyler Linderbaum and Kyle Hamilton in the first round, who were day one impact guys. I know Kyle Hamilton had mixed reviews in camp, but preseason he's been really showing up. And Tyler Linderbaum, who is hurt, I believe, but he should be back healthy soon enough. David Ojabo, second round. We know he's going to miss probably the whole season, but to take a flyer on him in the second round, you know what he does off the edge. And it just goes down the line, pick by pick. During the draft, I was like, they just keep making the best picks for the team. Still yet to sign Lamar Jackson. They offered him a contract, but he wants it fully guaranteed, which I think eventually they'll end up sorting out because he is probably your best quarterback you've had in franchise history. So I don't know. I'm just expecting a big year for the Baltimore Ravens. And yeah, I don't want to. Should we wait to do like record predictions at the end after we talk about all these? Okay.
Yeah. So you kind of touched up on the Ravens there. I don't mind kind of divulging into the next team, which is probably the reigning division champs, which should be the Cincinnati Bengals. And this is something that shocked me. I mentioned the Super Bowl odds leaders currently on FanDuel Sportsbook is the Bills at plus 600. Would it be surprising to say that the Bengals, who just came off a Super Bowl appearance in the strong AFC, they are currently 11th in Super Bowl odds at plus 2,200. Not going to spoil my record predictions here, but that is a number that I'm going to be hitting a lot. Cincinnati is well improved. According to PFF and their offensive line rankings, they're all the way up to 8th with the additions of Alex Kappa, and they brought in Lyle Collins as well. It's a really strong offensive line now, which Joe Burrow really hasn't had any experience with something that good. That was really the biggest complaint in his couple years here in Cincinnati, that he wasn't being well protected. Ted Karras was added to that as well, so that's 3 upgrades on the O-line. This is going to be the second year of the Jamar Chase experience here in Cincinnati. He had a phenomenal rookie season, right up there with the one that we just saw from Justin Jefferson. So the expectation is really high on this offense, along with T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon. But the thing that I don't think a lot of people are talking about is the second year removed from Joe Burrow's big season-ending injury a couple years back. Joe Burrow is 2 years removed from, what was it, a torn
ACL.
Torn ACL.
Torn ACL. He messed up his whole knee. Torn ACL. I think the MCL was in there too.
Yep. But main injury, torn ACL, very brutal injury. He's fully 2 years removed from that, and he was able to go to Super Bowl last year, coming off of that injury kind of late into the previous season. That's something that like really excites me for the narrative of like how much better Joe Burrow can be. We saw the end of the last season into the regular season going into the playoffs. He was on a torrid stretch, probably one of the best we saw from any quarterback at any point last season. So I'm really excited to see what Cincinnati is able to do. I have really high expectations for them. And personally, I think they are the class of the AFC.
Yeah, I'm not going to touch on it much more because Ben pretty much hit the nail on it. Cincinnati's going to be one of those top teams in the division. And I'm honestly surprised, too, that they're that low in Super Bowl odds. Honestly, this AFC is going to shake up a lot of it. But let's move on here to the next team, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yeah, I know.
Ahead of the Browns?
Wow. Let's jump into them a little bit. You've had some losses and some gains. You signed Minkah Fitzpatrick to a massive contract extension that pretty much locks him up in the secondary with Terrell Edmonds. You now have Ben Roethlisberger, who is retired, and you acquired 2 new quarterbacks in the offseason. You drafted Kenny Pickett in the first round of this year's draft, and then you went out and signed Mitch Trubisky to a 2-year deal as sort of an experiment quarterback to see if he succeeds or flops in this sort of new era for the Pittsburgh offense. You also drafted George Pickens in the early rounds of this year's draft. He looks very promising out of camp and practices this offseason. And the defense has pretty much remained stagnant. They still have Cam Sutton and Joe Hayden to complement with the new signing Levi Wallace. They also have the defensive line with Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt. And the offensive line has sort of stayed stagnant as well. They made a few small additions, but nothing that really jumped out on the radar. So it's all going to depend really on how this offense really starts to shape with second-year offensive coordinator Matt Canada. I think you're going to see a lot more of an open playbook here with Trubisky and maybe Pickett if he steps in later into the season. And it's going to allow these three receivers, Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, and George Pickens to, honestly, I think they're going to ball out this year. You're going to see a lot of impressive things and see what they're naturally capable of doing instead of a limited playbook like last year. It's all going to depend on how this offensive line holds up for the new quarterbacks as well. But I have the middle of the road, and we'll see what they can do. This is sort of an X factor team in this division.
Yeah, the O-line, because the O-line is bad. The O-line is bad.
It is bad.
They really scare me. And Kenny Pickett, through the first two preseason games, has looked great. So question for y'all. I think that Mitch Trubisky, because they named him the starter, I think they're going to keep him on a short leash.
I honestly think the leash is going to be stronger than what people think.
You think so? I don't know.
I don't think you're going to see Kenny Pickett until, if you see him at all, week 13, week 14.
Has Mitch been officially named the starter?
No, not yet.
Okay. I was going to say I hadn't seen that yet. I still wouldn't be surprised if Kenny Pickett's named the starter out of training camp.
I don't think you're going to see him named the week 1 starter only because you signed him to over $10 million. So you're putting, so if you're going to invest that money into a type of guy who we know is a top 3 pick in the past, he showed promising signs in his second year with the Bears. He's now working with a new and promising offense, different situation. You could see Trubisky get the start week 1. But if he surprises people and actually, leads the Steelers to a winning record through their first 6 games, would not be surprised if they let the leash go game by game. If they start to flop halfway, later half into the season, I think you're definitely going to see Pickett. But it's all going to depend on how he develops through the season and if Trubisky can stay consistent. That's the biggest thing.
I think where I stand with this division in its entirety, I'll kind of cover the Browns here together with the Steelers. I think the combination of the question marks at the quarterback position for both teams, it's obviously a different situation of why there are question marks there. Deshaun Watson will be out until week 13 is the first game he'll be eligible to play. So it'll be maybe a little bit of a too little, too late situation for him. And then the situation with Trubisky versus Kenny Pickett, both uncertainties at the position, at least in my opinion, and just kind of the question marks that surround him. It would be the O-line with Pittsburgh specifically and some of the pieces that they lost on defense. And then with Cleveland, it might just be the lack of skill position players that they have to kind of support Jacoby Brissett in the meanwhile, aside from the great running back room that they have. And they did add Amari Cooper, which is a big piece there. And they did also add David Njoku, or re-upped him on a big deal. But we really haven't seen anything out of Njoku. I think he's a great talent, but I think he won't be able to properly thrive until Deshaun Watson arrives, even though Jacoby Brissett surprisingly uses his tight ends a bunch. But yeah, I think it's just a combination of uncertainties there where I really have very few with both Baltimore and with Cincinnati. So I think it's just the division situation where they have two really top tier teams at the top of their division. I think it'll be really tough for both Cleveland and Pittsburgh to stay relevant in the division and just in the playoff race.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's going to be Baltimore and Cincinnati, and the other two will just kind of fade off towards the bottom.
Yeah,
but I'm interested to hear your division standings first, if that's okay.
Yeah, you go ahead first, Brett.
All right, so let's jump into our official record predictions for this year. I have the Ravens winning the division at 12-5. They are tied with the Bills for the best record in the AFC. And in second place, I have Cincinnati only a win behind at 11-6. They make the playoffs as well in the wild card. The Steelers actually have finishing with a winning record this year at 9-8. And then I have the Browns finishing last with a 6-11 record. I think it's going to be too little too late for Deshaun Watson, and they finish 6-11 on the season, securing a top 10 pick.
Very interesting.
It would go to Houston.
It would end up going to Carolina. Or Houston, I'm sorry. I'm thinking Baker Mayfield. We'll get into that in a little bit.
I'll go from top to bottom again. So I have the Bengals at the top of the division. I have them with a 14-3 record. They are the number 1 seed in the AFC in my standings. I have the Ravens at 11-6. They are also in the playoff mix there, right alongside the Dolphins. I have the Browns next at 5-12. Same thing with Brett. I think it's going to be a little bit of a too little too late, even though that I think Deshaun Watson is probably going to win a decent amount of the games that he starts at the end of the season. And then I have the Steelers at 4-13. I think that they are just I have very little confidence in them aside from the weapons that they possess on offense, which you can have great weapons, but utilizing them and having a good defense behind them, I don't really see it with Pittsburgh. I think they were just, and I'm going to be very similar with another team in the upcoming division. I just think that last year was a little bit of a fluke.
Oh, see that 4-13. That sounds like there's some like hate towards BC behind it.
There was not. I was being genuine. I was like, I can't give them a win here. Like there were a few teams that it was just rough to predict for, and Steelers were one of them.
Yeah. For me, I have Baltimore winning the division at 12-5. I have Cincinnati matching their record last season at 10-7. Cleveland 7-10. I still like Cleveland's defense, and I think that Jacoby Brissett is decent enough to get them some wins. But like Ben mentioned, I feel like it'll be mostly Deshaun in the back end. And then Pittsburgh, I have at 6-11, which would be Mike Tomlin's first losing record as head coach, I believe.
Ever. Yep.
That's how my my standings for the North go.
BC is like, I can't let it happen. Even in my predictions, I can't let it happen. It's hey, maybe if he gets fired midway through the season, he won't have to deal with it.
I don't see him getting fired. I think it'll be either a mutual departure or he retires. He's been there for long enough to where they can't fire him. It's kind of the same thing with Pete Carroll. I think that he's going to end up either retiring or like they mutually part ways. Like they can't announce that he gets fired. Like it can't happen. But yeah,
it's going to be a rough year for him and TJ Watt.
We will see. We will see. These are only predictions. All right, moving forward, we are now going to be jumping into the AFC South, which actually could be an interesting division. There's been a lot of improvements to each team into this past offseason. You have the Indianapolis Colts, who acquired Matt Ryan. You have the Houston Texans, who are now under the reign of Lovie Smith with second-year quarterback Davis Mills. You have the Jacksonville Jaguars now with Doug Peterson and second-year quarterback Trevor Lawrence. You also get Travis Etienne back. And we also have the Tennessee Titans, who are now without A.J. Brown, drafted a rookie receiver, Treylon Burks. And you are with Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry still under Mike Vrabel. So why don't we start with Mike here as we go through the AFC South?
Let's start with the Jags. The Jags are a team that I am loving as the weeks progress through this offseason. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be a whole different player this year. O-line is upgraded. They signed Brandon Scherf, Darius Williams to help out Shaq Griffin in the secondary, which I think helps because I think secondary was a pretty weak unit for them. Trayvon Walker, also first overall pick, who a lot of people didn't like that pick. I think he'll be fine. You saw him. You know how he can disrupt the game. I think he'll be a fine player. But he's going to get the Trayvon Walker versus Aiden Hutchinson comparisons for their whole careers. Besides that, Devin Lloyd later on in the first round, who was arguably the number 1 linebacker. So I like how they kind of worked on defense in the draft. Then they brought in Christian Kirk, Evan Engram,
Zay Jones,
right? All about the offense. They don't really have a clear-cut number 1, although it's Christian Kirk has been the main target in camp, but they don't really have you know what I'm saying?
They got Kirk and Marvin Jones. Those are your best 2 receivers right there.
Right. And then don't even get me started on Travis Etienne. We know Brett hates Etienne.
I actually kind of love him now. He's grown on me. He is growing on me a little bit. Continue, but we'll get into that point later.
Etienne, I'm so glad that the Jags drafted him after they drafted Trevor Lawrence. He was kind of that passing back, security blanket type deal for Lawrence at Clemson, and I think he'll do the same exact thing in Jacksonville. You get a real coach now too. You get Doug Peterson, who I think will be really good for them. Jacksonville, again, like the Jets, I don't see them. Records are really subjective in how you determine a successful season. I think their season is going to be successful by their means. So I'm excited to see them play. They're just a young team going out with really nothing to really prove in terms of being a top dog in the conference. So I'm excited to see the Jags this season.
Man was trying really hard to say nothing to lose, but he went in a different direction. I guess I'll be talking about the team that Jacksonville eliminated from the playoffs last year, the Indianapolis Colts, who are no longer led by the now commander Carson Wentz, now being led by Matt Ryan, a veteran coming in from the Falcons in a trade this offseason.
Love that.
They also made a couple big additions on the defense with Stephon Gilmore and Yannick Ngakoue in a trade with the Raiders. And the Indianapolis Colts are very interesting, where they didn't make any huge additions unless you really count Matt Ryan as a big addition. Both the defensive players that they added are Stephon Gilmore was coming off of kind of a weird year. He was dealing with injuries with the Patriots and then went over to Carolina and didn't do too much. And then Yannick Ngakoue was coming off a year with the Raiders where he was solid, but he wasn't anything too enormous. He was kind of outshined by Max Crosby and the rest of that defense. But honestly, I'm really confident in Indianapolis being able to not only do what they did last year, but even take a few steps forward, even if their record maybe doesn't show it. Matt Ryan leading this offense is going to be huge. I think that even though they still lack weapons in the wide receiver core, I think that guys like Alec Pierce and Paris Campbell, if they can take the proper steps forward alongside the wide receiver 1 and Michael Pittman, can actually make that wide receiver room a little bit more formidable, especially with Matt Ryan throwing the ball. I think that he'll be able to show off their shorter pass game much better than Carson Wentz was able to do, even if they're maybe taking a little bit of a discount in the deep ball game. And then Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines are a great running back duo. Jonathan Taylor was one of the best running backs, if not the best running back in the league last year. And Nyheim Hines is a very underrated player, where I think that with Matt Ryan under center, who loves to throw the ball to his running backs, we saw how much he threw to Cordero Patterson last year. I think Nyheim Hines is actually going to be kind of revitalized in this Frank Reich offense, where he hasn't been able to do much the last couple of years. But yeah, I'm kind of excited for Indianapolis. They always have a very strong defense, and I think in a division with somewhat weak offenses, I think that's going to stand out. And yeah, even though I don't think their record is going to be too exponentially high in the terms of the entire AFC, I have a lot of confidence in Indianapolis, and I have more faith in them than I did last year, especially with the upgrade from Wentz to Ryan.
I think this is their division lose.
I also agree. I honestly think that Indianapolis may not be the one that always makes the big splash, but they always do enough to where they put themselves in a legitimate contention spot. And I think, honestly, the swap from Wentz to Matt Ryan is what put them in a much more quote-unquote faithful position, seeing what Wentz did last year. But again, it could go around. We'll see what happens. But now moving into the next team, and we'll talk about the Tennessee Titans here. I will take on the Titans in this spot. You lost A.J. Brown in a trade to the Philadelphia Eagles on draft day in the first round of this year's draft. You then drafted Treylon Burks out of Arkansas. So he is now your presumed number one with Robert Woods alongside him. You have Derrick Henry, another year stronger after breaking his foot for last year, was out majority of the year. Your defense pretty much stayed stagnant. You've got Jeffrey Simmons as one of your dominant pass rushers. You've got Christian Fulton leading the secondary, and you've also got another veteran in Kevin Byard, who will also be leading the safety pack in Tennessee, always one of the dominant safeties. And it's sort of a situation now where the pass game for Tennessee is going to be solely dependent on how Ryan Tannehill is able to perform. Last year, we saw A.J. Brown sort of pick up some of the slack and really develop a lot of those positive yards with his talent. But now you're sort of working with an inexperienced receiver and Robert Woods, who's sort of used as almost a utility player, not really a true outside target. So Ryan Tannehill is either going to have to step up his game or Tennessee's going to have to move on. They did draft Malik Willis in the middle rounds of this year's draft. And I don't know. I think this is just a situation now where the run game can't really save you anymore with Derrick Henry as a 3-down back. And Tannehill's going to have to step up to help support the defense. So we'll see how it goes. And it could definitely be an interesting one, either side for Tennessee.
Yeah, just as a quick add, this is kind of the team I was alluding to with the Steelers, where this is a situation with Tennessee where, unlike the Steelers, where they still possess good weapons alongside Najee Harris and that good run game, even though there's question marks at quarterback, this is a situation where behind Derrick Henry, they're looking at currently Robert Woods and Treylon Burks are both dealing with injuries right now. And even if they were completely healthy, I don't think either of those can truly take over a number one, quote unquote, wide receiver role right now. So they're looking at Nick Westbrook-Akina as their number one target currently if week one started today, which, oh gosh, is completely correct. And in a situation where the AFC is full of highly touted offenses, and we saw in the playoffs last year that they were able to hold Cincinnati pretty well in that playoff game, but since they weren't able to handle like anything on offense, they were eventually overcome by the Cincinnati defense and the interception that they picked off Ryan Tannehill and the aforementioned Nick Westbrook-Akina on. But I have big concerns about what this offense is able to do. I understand that is one of the weaker divisions in the AFC, if not personally probably the weakest division in the AFC. I still think that their offense is too big of a concern. And unless Tannehill is able to show that form that he showed previously, it's going to be a big uphill battle for Tennessee. And that's without A.J. Brown. This is a team where it's going to show you the value of having a true number one receiver, how much of an impact A.J. Brown truly had on this team. I think it's going to be shown here with the Tennessee Titans.
Do we see Malik at all this year?
I personally think that we might see him at the end of the year in a couple of games. I don't think it's anything to do with how Tannehill plays. I think it will just be to see what they have.
I would honestly agree with that. If they eliminate themselves from contention with like 2 or 3 games left in the season, I could honestly see Malik Willis getting thrown in there just as an experiment to see what happens. I don't think Tannehill plays up to par, but who knows what could happen. I don't think they're expecting anything from Malik Willis if he does get thrown in. It'd just be an experiment situation.
And this is not meant to defend Tannehill in any means, but again, look at what he's working with. He has no absolute weapons. He kind of has to work with Henry as his main weapon. And I do believe he's going to be able to catch more passes if he stays healthy. That was something that the Tennessee offense was trying to implement last year, and it did work to some success. But yeah, it's going to be a really interesting situation in Tennessee this year.
Mm-hmm. So a small ad as well. I believe they did add Austin Hooper as well. He's their new tight end along with Anthony Ferkser. So Hooper's the number one. Not that it helps much, but he's probably going to be working with Westbrook-Akina and Burks, Woods whenever they're healthy. So last but not least, Mike, you have the last place team from last year, the Houston Texans.
Houston Texans. I like this team. I like how this team drafted. Again, no expectations from them. at all. They cannot compete with the rest of the AFC. But the rookie year of Davis Mills was really impressive. He was arguably the best rookie quarterback in the league last year. Him and Mac Jones were 1 and 2. He had a great year. I'm glad they're sticking with him and giving him another year under his belt. Offensively, I love Damian Pierce out of Florida. They drafted him in the 4th, 5th round, which I think he will end up if he doesn't start off. I think he will be the lead back. Probably my favorite back coming out of the draft. Receiver-wise, you have Cooks. You know what he does. You have Nico Collins, and you have who am I missing?
John Mechie, but he won't be back for a little bit.
Yeah. But offensive line, you drafted Kenyon Green. I've also been reading defensively, Jalen Petrie, their cornerback safety out of Baylor, ? I've been hearing that he's been thrown into some special packages defensively, and he's been really holding his own. So we'll see if that carries on in the regular season, if he can be like a little, something good for the future. Derek Stingley as well, who was the 3rd overall pick for them, which I think he will be. He is probably the number one corner right now. Houston Texans, there's really not much to say other than they're still rebuilding, excited for their young players for the future, and they have Cleveland's first pick. So how likely is it they have 2 top 10 picks next year? I think it's pretty likely.
Yeah, I would honestly agree. I think very much like Jacksonville, I don't think they're looking to assert themselves as a top dog winner. I think they're just looking to see improvement out of a lot of the young talent, especially with a first-year head coach like Lovie Smith. I think the primary focus will end up being improving and developing Davis Mills with the young offense. But this defense is also going to see a lot of shakeups and a lot of improvement on the positive side with Lovie Smith as the defensive play caller. So with that, why don't we get into our record predictions? Ben, why don't you start this one off?
Sure. So I'll start off at the top of the division. I have the Indianapolis Colts at 10-7. They are the division leads here. And following up in second place, maybe a little bit of a shock, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars at 7-10. I think this is going to be a well-improved team. I think they take a bit of a stride here on both sides of the ball. They made a lot of great additions, and I think the addition of head coach Doug Peterson is going to be really good, not only for Trevor Lawrence, but the development of Travis Etienne and the rest of the offensive pieces that they have around him. In third place and tied for last, the Titans and the Texans. I have them both at 5-12. I have a lot of concerns, like I mentioned, with Tennessee. I kind of view them very similarly to the Commanders or the Washington football team of last year, where they had very good weapons, or I'm sorry, they did not have. The Titans don't have very good weapons, but I view them similarly to the Commanders, where they present a very good defense, but their offense is very lacking, especially with the quarterback position. So I think there's just a limited ceiling where they are. I think they can be in a lot of games, but how many do they actually win? I don't exactly know. And the Texans, even though that I still have them at 5-12, I do think it'll be a little bit of an improved season. I honestly think that Davis Mills should be able to take a few strides. Honestly, the connection that he showed with Brandon Cooks and some of the other wide receivers at the end of last year showed a lot of promise. I'm just interested to see how the defensive side of the ball develops, because I don't think there are too many great pieces there now, but they have a lot of young players that could further develop.
Yeah, I'll jump into mine now. I also have the Colts winning at 11-6. I also predicted that Matt Ryan will throw for 5,000 yards this season and add to that stat line in his career. I, like Ben, also have the Jaguars in second at 9-8. I think they actually finish with a winning record. I think you're going to see Etienne be the number one back by the end of the year. I know. This is where I said I'd explain. Hated Etienne the first half of the offseason because of his injury. Now you're sort of looking at the situation. Doug Peterson loves his utility backs. He loved Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell when he was in Philadelphia. I think Etienne could follow a bit of the footsteps in a similar role. So they're in second. Third place, I have actually a tie between the Titans and Texans at 7-9 each. So I'm giving them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in the win column. But I have a tie for third place, Jags in second, Colts in first.
Okay. I have Indy winning the division at 11-6. I have Tennessee coming in second, 8-9. I don't think this is where we disagree, but I don't know. Ben did bring up a good point, but I just can't. I don't know. I just really love Tennessee's defense so much where I can't see them bottoming out to that degree. And like you mentioned with Washington, how they looked. I don't know. There's just something about Tennessee's defense. If it does happen, you're right.
And you really like the Washington defense coming into last year.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I don't know. It's very similar.
Continue on. I have Jacksonville 6-11 and Houston 5-12.
Wow, 6-11 for the Jaguars.
Yeah, I mean, they're a young team. Like from young teams, I don't expect unless you're like the Bengals, who have shown you. But I mean, no, who would have thought the Bengals would have been 10-7, made it to the Super Bowl? So,
all right. Yeah, that wraps up the AFC South. We've now gone through 3 divisions, the East, North, and South, and that leaves one last division to wrap up this first episode of Season 2 here on the 3 and Out podcast. The AFC West, probably the most talked about division in all of football this offseason because of the amount of moves that were made from each of the 4 teams. Kansas City lost Tyreek Hill. They traded him away to Miami for multiple picks. They acquired, though, Juju Smith-Schuster, Marcus Valdez-Scantling, and Sky Moore through signing and drafting. Chargers, a lot of additions. They added J.C. Jackson, Khalil Mack, and signing and trading. They traded for Khalil Mack from Chicago. They also have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams returning as wide receivers. Austin Eckler is your number 1 back still. Denver Broncos finally moved on from Drew Lock and sort of that mediocre quarterback era. They now have Russell Wilson from Seattle. They traded Noah Fant and Drew Lock to the Seahawks.
mediocre is being generous.
Yeah, all right, we'll put it at that. Defense, they also signed DJ Jones to help out on the front, along with second-year cornerback standout Pat Surtain. And then the Raiders, yeah, we're going to get into him in a few seconds, but the Vegas Raiders made an abundance of moves as well. They acquired Devontae Adams in a trade with Green Bay. They also still have Josh Jacobs. They just cut Kenyon Drake in their running back room. They also acquired Rock Ya-Sin in the Ngakoue trade with Indianapolis a few months ago. They also acquired Chandler Jones from Arizona. So their defense bolstered up a little bit. Their offense gained a true number 1 receiver in Adams. And all 4 of these teams are just loaded with talent right now on every front. So why don't we start with Ben here, just alluding into the AFC West.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with maybe the team that's been talked about probably the least, and that's the Vegas Raiders. They're a team that, like you mentioned, Brett, acquired in my opinion, the best wide receiver in the NFL, and that's Devontae Adams, reuniting him with his former college teammate and Derek Carr. They also brought in Chandler Jones to kind of fortify that defense, and they also have a new head coach in Josh McDaniels. So a few big moves there, and honestly, the Vegas Raiders were a little bit of a surprise last season with them actually making the playoffs, beating the Chargers in that final week matchup in Vegas. And I'm really interested to see kind of how they develop from kind of that surprise team that they were last year into trying to become a serious threat this year in the division. And even though I do have my hesitancies with them, I think their defense is definitely not the strongest in the division, and their offensive line is definitely probably the worst, and it's one of the worst in the NFL according to PFF. I think the just amount of pure weapons that they possess on offense is hard to ignore. With Derek Carr, who is arguably right on the fringe of top 10, top 12 quarterback, he is a very underrated player, and I think him having Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, and Darren Waller at his disposal is going to just wreak havoc on other teams. There was a piece that was put out a couple days ago, and it was safety Derwin James talking about some of the most, I guess, dangerous players that he's faced on offense and that he's covered. He mentioned Tyreek Hill and a couple other players, but one name he just slyly threw in there with Darren Waller was Hunter Renfrow. So that kind of just shows some of the danger that the Raiders possess. And he didn't even mention Devontae Adams. Those three players are going to be really tough to cover, especially if Devontae Adams is still going to be double teamed along with Waller like he was previously in Green Bay. And I think the running game with Josh Jacobs, and now they have rookie running back Zamir White, who is looking to take over kind of that pass catching back role for Derek Carr. Maybe it's Brandon Bolden, who knows. It'll probably be a committee knowing Josh McDaniels, but I don't know. It's really hard for me to ignore a team that has a top quality quarterback like Derek Carr, just added the best wide receiver in the league in Devontae Adams, and still possesses enough playmakers on defense and that front line that, man, it's really hard for me to dismiss. But it just shows kind of the promise and the potential and even the powerhouse stature, not only of this division in its entirety, but the three other teams that we have yet to mention.
Yeah, they are definitely going to be a powerhouse, to say the least. All four of these teams are going to be similar to the Vegas Raiders in that powerhouse nature, and Ben hit the nail perfectly. The amount of fortitude they added on the offense is certainly the one you can't be overlooked. So I will move on here and take on this next squad, the Los Angeles Chargers. Man, the Chargers made a whole bunch of moves this offseason. We mentioned Khalil Mack and J.C. Jackson getting added this offseason. However, Jackson is recovering from an injury right now. He just underwent surgery. You also signed Derwin James to a contract extension that he's been waiting for quite some time now. So you lock him up in your defensive back locker room. And you're sort of working with an offense now that pretty much stayed the same. You have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, who are both solid wide receiver ones on the outside. You also have Allen, who can play a little bit of slot. You have second-year receiver Joshua Palmer, who showed a lot of promise last year, and I think the Chargers are going to use him more than what people expect. And then you also have a backfield that includes Austin Eckler and Joshua Kelly, who were a solid three-down back plus the complement of Kelly last year with standout quarterback Justin Herbert. So this offense definitely has the pieces to succeed, and the defense is there. A lot of people are expecting the Chargers to really take that big leap and maybe even win the division this year, depending on how all of these pieces mesh together. Last year, they missed out on the playoffs, as we mentioned, to that win-in end game with the Vegas Raiders on week 18. They ended up losing on a game-winning field goal. And it was a lot of it was due to Brandon Staley and some little bit of coaching mistakes in the last 5-6 games of the season, some questionable decisions that were made by the coaching staff. They've had an offseason to figure it out, but the Chargers are going to look to revamp here and sort of reclaim the dominance that they had 6-7 years ago with the Phillip Rivers-led offense. So we could see a new era here in Los Angeles.
Denver Broncos. Just crack into them, huh? Traded for Russell Wilson in the offseason. So now they have a quarterback, right? No hate to the carousel of guys before or after Peyton Manning. But now they have a quarterback, and now just with that addition, they can compete. The Denver Broncos, to me, are like a Bucks team from 2020 when Brady signed there. Just a quarterback away that you have the team to do it. Get Russell Wilson, and they're right at the top in contention now. Randy Gregory, defensively, great signing. I love that off the edge from Dallas. Yeah, I don't think that, Denver lost anything too significant. They lost Bryce Callahan, Kyle Fuller this offseason, but I think Pat Surtain, the prominence of him last season, it shows you he is your number one. So that doesn't really affect me much. All these teams are going to be, in my opinion, one right behind the other when it comes to competition wise. But the AFC West division games are going to be, it's going to be fun, all of them. So the Denver Broncos, definitely excited to see them. Jerry Jeudy also, excited to see hopefully his emergence with Russell Wilson coming into the league as a rookie, arguably being a top 10 route runner, or talked about before the draft. Just as how much of a route technician he is. Now he will be able to put that on display fully with a Russell Wilson. Cortland Sutton, who was hurt all year, he'll come back, in my opinion, an underrated receiver. And emergent second year of Javonte Williams, who y'all know I am very, very high on. But yeah, the Denver Broncos team is one to be excited about. But I mean, they are in the toughest division in football, so we'll see how that one turns out for them.
Yep. And then we kind of wrap up here with the reigning champs and the team that people are starting to kind of make fun of now because they're a dynasty that isn't truly a dynasty. We'll actually see if that maybe further develops this year, and that's the Kansas City Chiefs. Fell a little bit short, losing to the Cincinnati Bengals in the AFC Championship last year. And since then, they have made some changes. They have lost their all-pro caliber wide receiver in Tyreek Hill, moving on to the Miami Dolphins, now leaving Travis Kelce as kind of the lone wolf on that offense. But they do have some new faces there. They added in Marquez Valdez-Scantling from the Green Bay Packers on a 3-year deal, Juju Smith-Schuster, TikTok star, on a 1-year deal. They also have Sky Moore coming out of Western Michigan as a second-round talent that they drafted. Hopefully competes for that second wide receiver role right next to MVS behind Juju. They have still a great offensive line. It's something that they worked on upgrading the previous year, and they still worked on doing that through both the draft and free agency. It's probably right inside the top 10 there. And they have developing players on the defensive side as well. You mentioned them drafting Trent McDuffie. They were also able to, well, they still have Chris Jones and Frank Clark kind of leading up that D-line. So they have some developing pieces along with some veterans on that defense. And like always, they have Patrick Mahomes at the quarterback position, which as long as you have him, they are always in a football game. So I think it's just interesting to see how Mahomes is able to work without kind of his gadget player in Hill that he's not been over-reliant on in the previous few years, but that was always something that made Kansas City dangerous. They always could take a lead or have a one-play touchdown where they just had a connection, Mahomes to Hill, and that was an easy dart that no one really had to question, and it was always something concerning in the back of people's minds. They don't truly have that now. So it's interesting to see how the offense kind of takes shape around Mahomes this year, and they also have a little bit of a question mark in the running back room with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and I guess Isaiah Pacheco's taken over the number 2 role kind of over Ronald Jones, but we'll kind of see how that camp battle turns out. But yeah, Kansas City hasn't been talked about as much as I believe the previous 2 teams in Denver and the Chargers have, but they still are very much a force in this division, and they are very much up there in the hierarchy of the AFC.
For sure.
Yeah, I honestly agree. And I think what impresses me the most about Kansas City is the amount of young talent they've been able to bring in the last few years. You mentioned McDuffie, you mentioned Pacheco. They drafted Sky Moore to complement Juju and Valdez-Scantling. And then you also have second-year linebacker Nick Bolton, who was a massive help in the playoffs last year for Kansas City. I think the young talent is going to end up let me rephrase with some English. It's actually going to be what pushes Kansas City over the top in the postseason. And I think you're saying the same thing basically every time for all 4 of these teams. It's just competition between all 4 within the division games. So,
and Kansas City, go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say one quick thing. I forgot to mention they did lose Tyrann Mathieu to the Saints in free agency. Did replace that with Justin Reed at the safety position. So kind of a just swap there of elder statesman at the position.
The Kansas City's defense is so much better than it was 2-3 years ago.
Yep.
Drafting Trent McDuffie, who I loved coming out
Don't forget
George,
Karlaftis too. Yeah.
George Karlaftis, yep. You add Leo Chenal now, drafted out of Wisconsin, to Nick Bolton, to Willie Gay, that linebacker room. I still have L'Jarius Sneed. Yeah, I mean, they're not mentioned, like Ben said, as much as the others, because I think the others are just kind of new things and new conversations to talk about. But Kansas City is definitely a team that is going under the radar when it comes to, you know, what media is talking about. I will start my division ranks because I've gone lost in every one.
Can I put a request on this one? Can you go from the bottom to the top?
Sure. So at the bottom, I have the Las Vegas Raiders at 9-8. In third place, I have Denver Broncos 10-7. Second place, I have Kansas City at 11-6, and I have the Chargers at the top 12-5. I have all of them one game behind the other.
All right,
Brett, I think you should go next.
All right. Taking a look at mine, I have the Chargers actually in last at 9-8. I have a two-way tie for second between the Vegas Raiders and the Denver Broncos at 10-7. And then in first place at 12-5, I have Kansas City. Bit of a different look. I know it's a shocker considering a lot of expectations this year.
Can I ask, can you explain that?
Yeah, I absolutely can.
That's very interesting.
I think, obviously,
Hold on.
I think the biggest...
I want to hear Ben first. Let Ben go.
You want to hear mine?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold on. Will it make it more difficult?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Brett, just go ahead.
No.
Okay.
I thought you
just share it and then we'll talk.
Go.
Share yours.
Right. I'll just do my standings from bottom to top. Okay. Yep. So at the bottom, I have the Raiders. I have them at 8-9. Next, I have the Chiefs at 11-6. Wow. Next, I have the Chargers at 12-5. And then I have the Broncos at 13-4.
All right. We'll get there. We'll get there. Brett, talk about Chargers coming last.
Brett, talk first.
So I think the big thing that's obviously the thing that stands out is Chargers at 9-8. The beef that I have with
beef,
I wouldn't bad word choice. The thing that scares me about the Chargers is what I saw in the last 6 games last year when the pressure was on. Everybody thought LA was going to make the playoffs. You had a dominant quarterback in Herbert, and the coaching couldn't come up to par and complement or give the tools necessary to help the team succeed. To me, it felt like Staley just wasn't making the right choices at the right time, and that's why they fell out of the playoffs. I know it doesn't seem like much.
That was all last season, though. He always went for fourth downs.
I understand, but now you're going up against 3 dominant teams for 8 total games this year, where every game is going to matter.
Right, but you're not mentioning the fact that they had a bottom 10 defense, adding J.C. Jackson, adding Khalil Mack, another year of Derwin James, another year of Asante Samuel.
It's so hard for me to put a stamp on how I can do this. It's just one of those things where you just have a gut feeling, and like you don't really have like a big explanation why. Because again, all 4 of these teams, you could literally just swap the names with the records, and it could still be a possibility.
No, 100%.
Any team,
100%.
Yeah. It's just one of those things where I just have a gut feeling that coaching is just going to be undervalued or underperforming, I should say, for LA, and that's why I have them there.
And I think that's a valid point. With the exception of Kansas City, I think there's question marks with, at least me personally, with all of the coaching staffs. Obviously, I'm putting a little bit more faith into both Denver and the Chargers over the Raiders, just based off the standings that I have. But yeah, no, I totally hear where you're coming from, Brett.
Yeah, no. And then with Denver and Vegas, I'm giving McDaniels the benefit of the doubt because he's had such failures so far as a head coach with the Broncos. So I think the offense and the defense as a whole together is going to be a lot better for Vegas, and it's going to be a Derek Carr-led show, and they're going to have to rely on his experience as a veteran, setting the tempo, setting the pace, and that's how they win football games. And then with Denver, like Mike mentioned, they are very similar to Tampa Bay 2 years ago, where you needed a quarterback to get over that extra hurdle. And Russell Wilson's going to allow this offense to unleash and let the defense just kind of do its thing instead of being so pressured. And then
And that
Kansas
leads us
City's
into Ben. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah.
So I'm really mad that I'm actually the low man on the Raiders because they're a team where I like really hope that they do well and that they don't.
I
finish in
only
last
have one
place.
more win over them than you do.
Yeah, it's just they're under 500 for me, and that like feels like they're having a bad season coming off the playoffs. But I think that's kind of a correlation with most of my like predictions and how I viewed it. If they have a weak O line or just like one or two like significant things that are like a detriment to their team, like I'll be straight up with this division, and this is the only division I did it with. I straight up ranked 1 through 4 their quarterback, their head coach, their offense, their offensive line, their defense, and I put like a number 1 through 4 with them. And I had the Raiders by far in last place, so
Yeah.
it was really tough for me. Ironically enough, I said Broncos, Chargers, Chiefs was my ranking for the schedule or for the standings. My actual rankings for how I ranked them with those 1 through 4 things, I had the Chargers, then the Chiefs, and the Broncos. So this is where I want to explain it. So the AFC West and who they play this year, they all face, I believe it's the AFC. They play the opposing Western Division, and it's when they play them is something that I kind of value them. I think Kansas City is third place, and I can clearly recognize that. I think that they play it a little bit more safe in the regular season than they have in previous years, just because like they are still working on developing that offense, and I don't think they have really much to prove. If they make it to the playoffs, I think that they're probably just as much of a threat as the Chargers and the Broncos, and I trust their head coaching staff the most just because they have the most experience. And the difference between Denver and the Chargers, it honestly came as close for me personally as one game that they play against a certain team, and I don't mind mentioning it. It's when they play the Niners, and the Niners are a very good team to me. They are a team that are in the playoff race for me. The Chargers play them late in the season when I think Trey Lance is going to be very acclimated with the offense. Denver plays them week 3 in Denver. I don't think there's any way that Trey Lance wins that game. It literally just came up to that. I do think that they're very similar. I think that the Chargers are a little bit better and probably are the better team. But I think because of scheduling, I had Denver higher.
I was just about to ask, like, obvious. I think we all know by now. Each of us have like our resident expertise. When I look at Denver, there's so many question marks. And I'll be honest, I was genuinely surprised when you had them at 13-3 because I didn't have that much faith in how they were going to pan out this season with all the young talent and the young coaching that was with this team. So if they can do it, phenomenal. But
I genuinely think it's because I have such a strong belief in their running game that even with the questions that they do have on their offense with Sutton, with Okwuegbunam, I said it right, I know.
You did,
and Judy. Even though that none of them have truly proven themselves, aside from maybe Sutton before his ACL injury, with Javonte and Melvin Gordon back, that honestly makes me a lot more comfortable with Russ not having to super rely on one of those wide receivers truly breaking out. And I think their defense is just on par as the Chargers, maybe a little bit of a tier below, but it's still good enough where I think it was close enough for the scheduling to actually have an impact, which I think this is the division this is the only division that scheduling actually had an impact on where I eventually ranked them. Because like I mentioned, I do think the Chargers are a slightly better team.
And that's just a testament to how good this division is.
True.
Because I have the Raiders last, he has the Chargers last, you have the Raiders last. All these teams are playoff teams. All these teams are potential playoff teams.
Yes.
But I mean, yeah.
All right, so that wraps up our AFC season preview here on the 3 and Out podcast. Ben,
would we like to go
wrap up?
through our playoff 1 through 7 for the AFC?
We could do that.
Yeah, let's just jump right into it. Why not? Ben, considering you brought it up,
Sure.
us out.
So like I mentioned a little bit before, I have the Bengals at the number 1 seed, the winners of the AFC North. Then the number 2 seed, I have I almost said the Bengals again because I like them so much. I have the Buffalo Bills at the number 2 seed, the winner of the AFC East. Then at 3, I have the Denver Broncos, the winner of the AFC West. 4, I have the Colts, winner of the South. And then in the wild card positions, I have in order the Chargers, the Dolphins, and then the Chiefs. I have the Ravens on the outside looking in, right on the outside, because they had the same record.
Mike?
The number 1 seed, I have the Buffalo Bills at 13-4. My number 2 seed, I have the LA Chargers. 3 is the Baltimore Ravens, and 4 is the Colts. And the wild card teams, I have Kansas City getting that first wild card spot at 11-6, and then I have a 3-team tie actually at 10-7. I think it'll be Cincinnati and Denver at 6-7, and then I have Miami outside also 10-7. But when I did these, I just based it off of who I think is the strongest team, and that's just essentially how it came down.
With mine, the Ravens and the Dolphins specifically have a matchup. I think it's in week 4 or something. I have Miami winning that game, so that's where I have the tiebreaker.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you guys listed, so I guess it's my turn now. Number 1 seed for me is Buffalo at 12-5. Then I have Baltimore. Then it's Kansas City, and then Indianapolis as the 4 seed. And then my wild card spots in order are Cincinnati, Denver, and Vegas. So it was between Vegas and Miami towards the end, but Vegas got them on the tiebreaker. So
he all had tiebreakers in there. That just shows how closely packed the AFC is at the top.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with that, it officially wraps up our AFC season preview on the 3 and Out podcast. As always, you can check us out on all of our podcast platforms, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and we're now on YouTube as our main platform. So be sure to check us out on YouTube, give a subscription, wherever you can find us. But signing off for now with Ben Pope and Mike Cicchetti, my name's Brett Schaubs. Be sure to stay tuned in for episode 2 for our NFC season preview. But we sign off for now, and as always, take care, brush your hair.